Hey guys, welcome back. I am so excited to present to you today the Barrier Sorceress. I spent so many hours once again putting together a build that is just stuffed full of synergies, and actually what inspired this build was an interview that Rod Ferguson did very recently where he said, if I was a sorceress, the first thing I do is go get the aspect that gives you a barrier when damaging elites. And I thought, oh my gosh, why did he say that? And sorceresses have insane amounts of synergy if you go all out barriers. Now I might be thinking, I want to deal damage, I don't want barriers. But there are an absolute insane amount of damage bonuses, synergies, skill upgrades that you get when you have a barrier on your character. It's absolutely insane, and I can't wait to show it to you guys. So let's just dive right into it. So we're going to start with skills, and we're going to get Frostbolt, and we're actually going to be going a very frost-centric sorceress. Now, I know you guys know that Chain Lightning is all the rage. It got nerfed recently. It's still pretty good, but you guys are going to be very excited about what you can actually put together that isn't Chain Lightning. So we get Frostbolt, does some frost damage, chills them, and we're going to get Enhanced Frostbolt, has a chance to explode on chilled enemies and chills everyone in an explosion. Then we also have Flickering Frostbolt. Frostbolt makes frozen enemies vulnerable for 3 seconds. Frozen is a really big part of this build, and so is vulnerable. So this will help us kind of complement those two. We're not going to use it that much, but we will use it, of course, to generate mana. As we move over to the core skills, we're going to get Ice Shards. Now, Ice Shards is absolutely extremely powerful, especially after we get an aspect in the Fractured Peaks, which we can go ahead and get that now. Let's put that in our gloves. That is called Aspect of Piercing Cold. Ice Shards pierce 4 to 3 times. It's kind of weird, instead of 3 to 4, dealing 20 to 25% less damage per subsequent enemy hit, unlocked by completing Dead Man's Dredge in Fractured Peaks. So right away, you can upgrade this core ability. It shoots 5 shards that deal 25% damage each, deals 25% increased damage to frozen enemies. That's awesome. Huge upgrade to its potency when enemies are frozen. And we're also going to get Enhanced Ice Shards. Ice Shards have a 40% chance to ricochet to another enemy. Ice Shards always ricochet off frozen enemies. So it's kind of like Chain Lightning in that it's going to hit an enemy and then bounce and hit another enemy. And with this aspect, it'll pierce them. So really you get infinite amounts of bounces, right? Very, very cool if they're frozen, right? So we're going to get this, and then we're going to get Greater Ice Shards. While you have a barrier active, casts of Ice Shards treat enemies as if they were frozen. So you actually don't even need to have them frozen all the time if you can just have a barrier on all the time. And so what we're going to get now is our first barrier aspect, which is called Aspect of the Protector. Damaging an elite enemy grants you a barrier absorbing a ton of damage actually for 10 seconds. It can only happen once every 30 seconds, and you can get this by completing the Lost Archives and Fractured Peaks. So this is like, Rod Ferguson said this at a bar, right? So he probably let this slip, but he said this is what he'd get if he was a sorceress right away. Lost Archives and Fractured Peaks, you can get it right away. And you get Barrier, a really strong barrier. And remember guys, an elite enemy is not just an elite, it's also a champion, and it's also a boss. So, and a world boss. So anytime you damage a boss, an elite, a champion, this is going to give you a barrier, which basically makes your attacks treat them as if they're frozen, and you get a ton of bonuses if they're frozen. It's going to do 25% increased damage, which is huge, and it's also going to ricochet off of them. It says here, Ice Shards always ricochet off of frozen enemies. So if a boss is summoning minions to come at you, you can just keep focusing the boss, and it's going to shoot Ice Shards off and also hit those enemies and clear them out for you. And that is, of course, as long as you have a barrier. And so this is one source of barrier, but as we continue to go down the skill tree, as you can see, we're level 6, we can finally get defensive skills. We're going to get Frost Nova. This is extremely powerful. It's going to freeze everyone. So if you can't have a barrier on, you can freeze them. And then we're also going to get Enhanced Frost Nova. Killing enemies frozen by Frost Nova reduces the cooldown by 1 second, up to 4 seconds per cast. Very nice. And then Mystical Frost Nova. Very important. Frost Nova makes enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds, increased to 6 seconds against bosses. That vulnerability is so powerful. 20% increased damage against targets that are vulnerable. And you get that whenever you cast Frost Nova on them. So that's super strong. We also want to get Ice Armor, a barrier, right? A barrier, that's part of the build, of ice forms around you for 6 seconds, absorbing 30% of your life in damage. While Ice Armor is active, 5% of your damage dealt is added to this barrier. So another source of barrier to get those amazing bonuses, which there are even more. And then we're going to get Enhanced Ice Armor. While Ice Armor is active, your mana regeneration is increased by 25%. It's going to really help you be able to continue to cast all of your core skills, your Ice Shards more frequently. instantly. Then we're also going to get teleport. Teleport's just such a great skill. It gives you unstoppable and it gives you increased mobility. And we also want to get enhanced teleport to decrease the cooldown to 6.5 seconds per enemy up to 3 seconds. So that's 6 enemies. You want shimmering teleport. After teleporting, you gain 30% damage reduction for 5 seconds. So that's really nice. You can actually teleport into groups of enemies and then not be afraid because you'll have that 30% damage reduction. Okay, cool. So now we are level 14. Let's put one more point into ice shards, and now we're level 15. Now at level 15, there's a quest you can do just for sorcerers where you can go and get your enchantment slot. So I recommend go do that now at level 15. Also at level 15, you probably just finished Act 1, and so it's a perfect time to go get your enchantment either way before you head to Skazglen, whatever it is. And I recommend you actually get ice shards as your enchantment effect. Now you can actually use the same enchantment effect as your core skill that you're currently using. So you could definitely go ice shards and read this here. Ice shards automatically conjure and fly towards frozen enemies. Now, there's a lot of frozen in this build, but really what's really amazing is Frost Nova is going to instantly freeze everyone in an AoE. And this is where I believe that Barrier Sorceress has the highest clear speed in the game, which we're going to put it all together. But for now, let's just look at this clip here. You can see you just cast Frost Nova and it basically just instantly killed everything, because the second they got frozen, ice shards flew out at every single enemy that was just frozen. And so there's crazy amounts of synergy between ice shards enchantment effect and Frost Nova. And as we get more freezing effects, the enchantment effect of ice shards is only going to get stronger and stronger. And we're also going to keep those ice shards for really drilling down bosses with a powerful flurry of ice shards as well. So basically now that we have all these defensive skills, we're going to put a point into align the elements. You gain 1% damage reduction against elites for each second you haven't taken damage from one, up to 40%. So you're going into like a boss fight with like 40% damage reduction. That's awesome. And then we're also going to get protection. Using a cooldown grants 10% of your maximum life as a barrier. There you go, for 2 seconds. So another source of barrier. And actually this, in my opinion, is another sort of 1 point wonder. It's only going to last 2 seconds. This was nerfed. So barrier was protection was too strong. It used to be 5 seconds. And more points in this is only going to give you more percentage of your max life. It's not going to make it last longer. And since it only lasts 2 seconds, I really doubt you're going to lose 10% of your life within 2 seconds. And so I think 1 point is enough. And so anytime you use a cooldown, you're going to get a barrier. So anytime you use Frost Nova, anytime you use Ice Armor, anytime you use Teleport or your ultimate, which we're going to get to soon. So we're also going to get up here, we have Devastation. Maximum mana is increased by 3. And then we have Elemental Dominance. Your core skills deal 3% increased damage when cast above 50 mana. So you're going to get 9% increased damage. You also want to get Glass Cannon. We're going to put 3 points into that so that you deal 18% increased damage, but take 9% more damage. So that's very strong. And then finally, we're going to get Deep Freeze. Encase yourself in ice, becoming immune for 4 seconds, continually dealing 25% damage and chilling enemies for 14%. When Deep Freeze expires, it deals an additional 100% damage. Casting Deep Freeze again ends the effect early. So Deep Freeze is very strong. And then we're going to get Prime Deep Freeze, because when it ends, you're going to gain 10% of your base life as a barrier for 6 seconds for each enemy you froze while it was active. So yet another source of barrier, which is extremely powerful. And then we're also going to get Supreme Deep Freeze. When Deep Freeze ends, your non-ultimate cooldowns are reduced by 50%, which is a really big deal. We want to be using our cooldowns as often as we can, these defensive cooldowns, because each time we use them, we'll get protection, which will give us another barrier. So tons of barrier synergies all around. Really, really powerful. We do also want to finish maxing out Ice Shards. Since we're going to be using it so frequently, we just want it to be doing as much damage as humanly possible. Now, there are a couple aspects we need to grab within Skazglen. Right now we're level 30, and at level 30, you're probably already in Skazglen. So I'm going to go through some of the aspects you can gather while you are in Skazglen. And one of them is Aspect of the Expectant. Attacking enemies with a basic skill increases the damage in your next core skill by 5%, up to 50%, unlocked by completing the Underroot in Skazglen. This isn't like the craziest aspect in the world. We're going to replace it later, but it's still a good one you're going to want to pick up while you're in Skazglen, and it is going to help you increase your damage for sure. Okay, so now that we got that aspect, we're going to continue to go through our skill tree. Now, some of these skills that we're going to get here are in the ultimate side of the tree, which are very frost focused. We're going to get Permafrost. Frost skills deal 5% increased damage to elites, which again are champions, elites, and bosses. We're going to to get increased cold damage to vulnerable enemies, and we're also going to get Frigid Breeze. Cold damage against vulnerable enemies has a 20% chance to generate 5 mana. That's really just a 1-point wonder. You don't want to put more points into that than necessary. And then we're going to get Avalanche. Lucky hit, your frost skills have a 10% chance to make your next cast of Ice Shards, Frozen Orb, or Blizzard consume no mana and deal 40% increased damage. Chances doubled against vulnerable enemies. And again, vulnerable is spread through Mystical Frost Nova, which makes enemies vulnerable for 4 seconds and 6 seconds against bosses. Now at this point, you're level 34. Just remember at level 30, you can get your second enchantment effect, and we're going to get Fireball. When you kill an enemy, they explode in a fireball for 50% of its damage. Now the reason this is so crazy is because you're basically instantaneously killing every enemy that got hit by Frost Nova, right? You cast Frost Nova, instantly you're shooting shards off to those frozen enemies. They're getting hit by instantly automatically conjured ice shards, and then they're dying, and then when they die, they're going to explode and deal fireball damage. And what's really crazy is that we're going to get something that makes this build absolutely insane. And if you've seen some of my other builds, you might know what's coming. My favorite aspect of shared misery. So lucky hit, when you hit a crowd controlled enemy, there's a 30% chance for that crowd control effect to spread to another unaffected enemy, unlocked by completing Oblivion in Hauzar. So the way this works is that you are basically going to use Frost Nova, they're all going to get frozen, and then they're all going to get hit by an instantly created flurry of ice shards. And depending on how many monsters you hit, the idea is that you're going to be spreading this freeze effect, right? Because freeze is a crowd control. And so there's so many ice shards flying out that the idea is that you're going to be spreading that freeze effect beyond the radius of that Frost Nova. And if you spread the freeze beyond the radius of that original Frost Nova, your ice shards are going to shoot at those newly frozen enemies automatically. And if those ice shards hit those frozen enemies, then they're going to also have a chance to spread that freeze effect even further. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, well, lucky hit is way less than you think. 30% multiplied by 16% is like really low, right? I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but it's low, right? Well, that's where precision magic comes in. You can put 3 points into this and it'll increase your lucky hit chance by 15%. So that's one way that you can really boost the chances of this just going crazy. And don't forget, once those frozen monsters are shattered, they're going to explode thanks to the Fireball enchantment effect, which does 50% damage. And that's going to deal damage and potentially deal damage to other frozen monsters, which could also help spread that freezing effect. So I think, the sky's the limit in terms of how far the Ice Shards combo with Freeze goes. Very, very exciting to pick this up. You can get it guaranteed every single time. Aspect of Shared Misery from Oblivion and Hauzar. Highly recommend that one. And then you're also going to want to get Aspect of Control. Put it in this ring slot. This is where the build just starts getting really crazy. So you deal 30 to 40% more damage to immobilized, stunned, or frozen enemies, unlocked by completing Sunken Library in Kyrgyzstan. So if you might think, Ice Shards, they're just not hitting for enough damage. Well, this is going to make them do 30% more damage to those frozen enemies. And again, it's automatic. It's going to automatically shoot those Ice Shards when they're frozen. It's really cool. As you can see in this gameplay footage, it just automatically starts shooting them out of your character automatically. It's really, really awesome. We're also going to want to get Storm Swell Aspect. You deal 11%, 11 to 22% increased damage to vulnerable enemies when you have a barrier. And remember, we have so many sources of barrier with this build. And of course, we're going to cause vulnerability through our Mystical Frost Nova and also through our basic skill Frostbolt when we use it on a frozen enemy. And there's actually another aspect we can get called Aspect of Biting Cold. We'll put it here for now. You can actually get this guaranteed. It doesn't say on this build calculator because it's a little outdated, but this is actually gotten from Kyrgyzstan. Actually, I'm sorry. I think it's Dry Steppes. Let me double check. It is Dry Steppes. Okay. So this drops in Dry Steppes. When you freeze an enemy, there's a 25 to 35% chance they become vulnerable for 3 seconds. So that's pretty awesome. You're freezing enemies like crazy, right? And now there's a chance that whenever you freeze them, they're going to become vulnerable. This is obviously a very important aspect for this build. So make sure when you go to Dry Steppes, you pick this one up. And it doesn't say where exactly in Dry Steppes, but it is in Dry Steppes for sure. Okay. We're also going to want to get Aspect of Might while you're in Dry Steppes. Basic skills get 25% damage reduction for 4 seconds. You can unlock that by completing Dark Ravine in Dry Steppes. I put this in pretty much much every build. 25% damage reduction is huge, and so you should just definitely go out of your way and get this one. We have pretty much every single one that you can get from dungeons, but I also want to get one that you can that you don't get from dungeons, which is Aspect of Fortune. You'll have to find this one, but this build has a lot of lucky hit in it, and so you really want to get this. It also has great synergy with all the barriers. It says here your lucky hit chance is increased by 10 to 20% while you have a barrier active, and so it's perfect synergy for this build. We have so many sources of getting barrier, whether it's from our defensive skills, every single one gives us a barrier. Our ultimate gives us a barrier. When we deal damage to an elite, it gives us a barrier. So we have so many sources of barrier. This is just a really great one to get, Aspect of Fortune. Now we do want to get rid of Aspect of the Expectant, so I'm going to move Aspect of Biting Cold out of here. We'll move it up here, and we're going to get Conceited Aspect. This is the most powerful legendary aspect for this build. Deal 23 to 33% increased damage while you have a barrier active. As you can tell, with a barrier build, this is going to be just the most powerful thing. You're going to want to put this into a two-handed weapon so it's twice as strong, and so what you're looking for is the highest roll of this as you can, and if you put it on a two-handed weapon, it's twice as strong. So this is 66% increased damage while you have a barrier active. By far, I believe the most powerful aspect in the entire game. Plus 66% damage. Absolutely insane. This is why I think this build is probably, it's Sorcerer, they're overpowered. This might be the most overpowered build in the entire game. Maybe they nerf it, I don't know. And so now I think we have pretty much everything that we were looking for. Yeah, the last thing we want to switch out is Aspect of Might for Frost Blitz. Frost Nova gains an additional charge, but the cooldown per charge is increased by 30 to 40%. So you don't really care about the cooldown, you just want an additional charge because we're going to go ahead and get Elemental Attunement, Lucky Hit, right? And we have tons of things to increase Lucky Hit. It says here, Lucky Hit, critical strikes have a 5% chance to reduce the cooldown of one of your defensive skills. Can only happen once every 10 seconds. We'll put 3 points into that, so that critical strikes have a 15% chance to reset the cooldown of your defensive skills. And we want to reset our defensive skills so that we can proc more protection, which is more barriers. And we still haven't finished all of our skills, so I'm going to go ahead and you're going to put points into Permafrost, 15%. Frost skills deal 15% increased damage to elites. Horror Frost, you deal 9% increased damage to chilled enemies and 18% increased damage to frozen enemies. Huge. And guys, remember, as long as you have a barrier active, it says here, casts of ice shards treat enemies as if they were frozen. So that's an 18% increased damage there because of Hoarfrost. Very important one. We'll also put more points into Icy Touch, 12% increased cold damage to vulnerable enemies. And again, we'll get that from Mystical Frost Nova. Gives 6 seconds of vulnerabilities against bosses. Absolutely insane how much synergy there is. And then don't forget how amazing Avalanche is. Lucky Hit. Your Frost skills have up to a 10% chance to make your next cast of Ice Shards, consume no mana, and deal 40% increased damage. Chances doubled against vulnerable enemies. There is so much percent increased damage in this build. It's actually kind of crazy. Makes me think that they might nerf this. Now there's also some more Frost passives we didn't get yet. As you can see, it's just perfect synergy. Icy Veil, your barriers have plus 15% increased duration. Perfect for the barrier build. And then we have Cold Front. While you have a barrier active, you apply 24% more chill. And we're also going to get Snap Freeze, 3 points. Lucky Hit, Frost skills have up to a 9% chance to instantly freeze. So, and again, freeze, there's just so much synergy in this build when enemy is frozen, whether that's from aspects here, dealing 30% more damage to frozen enemies. When an enemy is frozen, you automatically shoot ice shards at them, and they deal 25% increased damage to frozen enemies. So there is just such an incredible amount of synergy everywhere. I almost can't believe how good this build is. It's absolutely insane. And so this is basically the build. I have 1 extra point. I think I could put it into Frigid Breeze. Cold damage will give you a 20% chance to generate 10 mana. We can go ahead and take that. But this build absolutely blows me away. I think it will be one of the most powerful sorceress builds, the Barrier Sorceress, with these aspects. Aspect of the Protector, you can get this right away in Fractured Peaks. Aspect of Piercing Cold, once again, you can get this right away in Fractured Peaks. And then you basically just want to probably go right away and get Aspect of Biting Cold from Dry Steps as soon as possible to make enemies that get frozen vulnerable as well for 20% increased damage. So this is just kind of the order I'd go in. And you definitely want to get Aspect of Shared Misery. I think this is where you can really start doing some freaky things, because once you freeze one enemy, if that spreads to another enemy, I think the potential is limitless. And don't forget, every time an enemy dies, they explode in a fireball for 50% of its damage. Now, because this build relies on enchantment effects so much, with the ice shards, automatically shooting at frozen enemies and the fireball explosion on death, I want to talk about Paragon boards a little bit and which one to get first. So we're actually not going to get Icefall, which is probably the one that most Frost sorcerers go for. So we're going to just really quickly, I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert on the Paragon board, but I'm going to choose all of the offensive aspects here. So primarily looking at rare nodes, we're going to get Elementalist for increased damage and life, and we're going to get Elemental Balance for increased damage and intelligence. From there, we're going to get Enchantment Master. So we're going to just go straight away to this legendary aspect. We'll pick up that rare node, Enchantment Master. Your enchantments are 20% stronger. This is huge because our Ice Shards enchantment is huge. Our fireball enchantment, I mean, both those two together I think are just so powerful because they're automatic. It's just, if you just freeze someone, they start going off. So I think it's super powerful. We're just going to continue going this way. This might not be the exact path that you end up going, but just for the sake of an example, we're going to finally go and get Icefall second. And so Icefall here, let's go ahead and rotate this, and we'll just work a path over here. Actually, you go the other way. You actually want to pick up Cryomancy. Cryomancy is going to give you 5% increased cold damage. I prefer the offensive skills. So Icefall says, killing a frozen enemy grants you 15% of your maximum life as a barrier for 5 seconds. So, this actually is where you should never not have a barrier now at this point, because whenever you kill an enemy, literally, you get 15% of your maximum life as a barrier for 5 seconds. You should be constantly killing frozen enemies. And so this barrier sorc now has gone like perma barrier, and you're going to be getting all of these bonuses, whether it's conceded aspect, 66% increased damage basically permanently. You're going to have this 11 to 20% increased damage to vulnerable enemies while you have a barrier, aspect of control. This one doesn't have to do with a barrier, but here we go. Lucky hit chance is increased by 10 to 20% while you have a barrier. All of these synergies with barrier basically. So there you go. Damaging an elite enemy grants you a barrier. Those are the two Paragon boards I definitely recommend you go after. Enchantment Master and Icefall. Let me just check my notes here. Yes, there is a third Paragon board you want to go for called Frigid Fate. So let's just take the shortest route so I can show you what that does. Okay, Frigid Fate, and let's get it as close as possible. So let's just take this route. Frigid Fate. Dealing cold damage to vulnerable enemies increases your lucky hit chance by 1% for 5 seconds up to 15%. So this build is clearly using vulnerability, it's using chill, using freeze, and it's also using lucky hit quite a bit. And the reason lucky hit is so important is because the key passive here. It's literally a lucky hit key passive. So lucky hit, your frost skills have up to a 10% chance to make your next cast of ice shards. Frozen orb or blizzard consume no mana and deal 40% increased damage, chances doubled against vulnerable enemies. And again, whenever we freeze an enemy because of aspect of biting cold, you have a 25 to 35% chance they'll become vulnerable for 3 seconds. So the synergy is just off the chart with this build. If you think you have to go chain lightning, think again. I think this build is just absolutely insane. It's taking advantage of every single barrier synergy. And also, I love the automation of ice shards. If you just freeze an enemy, ice shards just fly out of you in every direction, dealing tons of damage. And when those enemies die, they just automatically explode. So there's just so much potential for this build. And I love aspect of shared misery. The fact that you can spread freeze automatically just by hitting a crowd controlled enemy. And remember, that's lucky hit, which we improve dramatically through passives, through our Paragon board. Our lucky hit is just way up there. And we even get it up here. Aspect of fortune. Lucky hit is increased by 10 to 20% while you have a barrier active. So out of all of the classes where lucky hit, might seem low, Sorceress definitely will have the highest lucky hit out of any class, making aspect of shared misery the most potent for the sorcerer. I'm really excited about this build. Again, this took me like 6+ hours of theory crafting to put together. I think it's going to be the best. one of the best builds for Sorceress. Definitely top tier, S tier, whatever you want to call it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section. I'm excited about this build. Every time I do these builds, I'm like, oh, now I have to main this class because I got to show everyone how overpowered this is. But really had a blast putting this one together, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I'll put links to the starter version and sort of where I left off right here, so you can take a look at both. And if you guys could do me a really big favor, just hit that like button if you enjoyed this, and subscribe for me, just so you don't miss out on any future builds if you liked this one, and it helps me out a lot. So thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.